Please wake up. Something wet hit my cheek. Mary was shaking me. She was crying, her face above mine. It was morning. Suddenly, the events of last night came rushing back to me in a flood. I jolted up. Where is Yeshua? At Fortress Antonia. We must hurry. So we rushed out of the garden. My head was killing me. Mary told me that she thought that I had been arrested, and she had left the garden to go find us. She heard the commotion at the house of Caiaphas, and Yeshua was on trial there in the night. She wasn't sure how it ended, except Yeshua was in the dungeon. It wasn't until early this morning she realized I wasn't there. She heard a soldier say that they were taking Yeshua to Pilate, and that's when she came back to the garden to look for me. So as we came into the Roman Praetorium, I was immediately shocked at the crowd. It was barely the second hour of the day, and the forum was full of people. They were incited and angry. And then I saw him. Yeshua was barely able to stand. He had been beaten and was almost unrecognizable. What was happening? Why? Pilate had him by the arm, showing the crowd how sufficient the beatings had been. But they cried, "Crucify him!" Pilate washed his hands and handed him over to the guards who had a crossbar prepared. No! This week had been so full of dreams. Hosanna, victory, a new kingdom, a loving and righteous king, miracles and a miracle worker. And I watched it crumble in front of my eyes. As they drew the heavy crossbar onto him, I saw his knees give way slightly, and he grimaced through the caked blood. My king was wearing a crown that they had made to mock him, thorns of it pressed firmly into his scalp. I kept waiting on that voice from heaven to command this to stop. But it never came. Mary was crying uncontrollably. I held her tightly as they began to parade Yeshua out of the Damascus gate. We pushed through the crowd, attempting to get close to him. I saw him trip and fall. The heavy crossbar rolled up his neck, driving his head to the stone road, pressing that crown deeper into his scalp. This was more than I could bear. I left Mary and I ran to him, and again, moving swifter than my feet, I tripped over the foot of another onlooker, and I landed on my hands and knees next to Yeshua. I lifted the crossbar off of his neck and sat it on the road in front of him. He raised his head and looked at me. Those gentle eyes, still so kind, but buried beneath smears of dried blood. He managed a weak smile. "I told you to mind your step." And then the smile waned, and I asked, "Why, Yeshua?" He cut his eyes slowly and weakly and simply said, "Passover." The soldiers were shouting at him to pick his cross back up. "He's too weak," I shouted. "Well, someone's going to carry that cross up this hill," came the Romans' response. Well, then I will be swift, and I will mind my step. So the soldier told me to pick it up, and I hoisted the bar onto my shoulders. Yeshua managed to stand, and we started up the hill together. "Thank you, Simon," he whispered. I watched him limping next to me. I wanted to carry him as well. My mind went back 2 days when we ran up Olivet together. This time, there would be no winner. This time, I would watch my friend die. And for what? He said Passover. But then his Haggadah came back to me. He had compared the Mashiach to the Lamb. And suddenly, the words of Isaiah rang loudly. He was like a lamb before the slaughter. The suffering servant was the Mashiach, the righteous one. The servant will make many to be accounted righteous. He was doing this for me. By his stripes we are healed. His speech at the temple, it made sense. The voice from heaven made sense. I will be glorified in you. But how can a king reign from the dead? I began to cry, sobbing uncontrollably. The weight of that cross felt like 1,000 talents. A hand gently touched my side. It was his. Even in his own suffering, he was comforting me. You can do this. It will be glorious. How? How, King Yeshua, can this be glorious? He said the grave will not have victory today. And we had reached the top. The soldiers were taking the cross and taking Yeshua's clothes. This was really about to happen. Mary came from the crowd. We backed away from the soldiers' work. I turned my head as I heard the clink. His hammer connected with nail. Again and again. And Isaiah whispered in my ear, he was pierced for our transgressions. And then they lifted him up. And he shouted out the words of David, my God, why have you forsaken me? And then that entire psalm played in my mind. And it was Yeshua's prayer. I fell to my knees. The pain in my heart was just too much. I can't watch this, Mary. She took my hand. We cried together. We knew we couldn't leave him. The crowd dispersed, but a handful of us stayed, including John, Yeshua's mother, and we watched him die. The sky grew unusually dark. Ground shook. Thunder fell. But Yeshua died. I was waiting on that glory, but it didn't come. My heart was shattered. My hope fell. I watched as they took him down. I watched the women wrap him. I watched them lay him in a stranger's tomb. I watched them close it up. This was the worst day of my life. If Isaiah was right, if this took away any transgressions of mine, I'd take them back just to have him here. Just give me my king back.